The cold breath of the Harz Mountains still carries the metallic scent of iron and soil where the vault was found. Beneath a nondescript clearing near Nordhausen, a drilling crew struck an unnatural resistance. Reinforced concrete, layered in steel, buried deeper than any post-war structure should have been. Within hours, the site was sealed off under Bundesarchiv supervision. What began as routine construction had become a matter of national security. Inside the vault lay forgotten crates stamped with a red insignia, the broken son of Project Morgenrot. The air was dry, preserved, like time itself had been locked away. Film reels, schematics, a ledger listing human names and test codes, some marked with a single word, erfolgreich, successful. 77 years after the fall of the Third Reich, Germany had opened a door that was never meant to be unsealed, and the question was no longer what they would find inside, but who had sealed it again in 1957 under Allied authority, and why. Chapter 1. The Vault Beneath Nordhausen. At first, it was dismissed as another Cold War relic, one of hundreds of abandoned facilities scattered across the Harz region. Yet the depth and design of the structure beneath Nordhausen told a different story. Coordinates Tendig 4723 E marked the entrance, a narrow shaft descending 40 feet into the limestone, reinforced with interlocking steel beams riveted with the Reichsadler crest. The official excavation began under the supervision of the German Federal Agency for Monument Protection, though within 48 hours, men in unmarked uniforms arrived. The site perimeter expanded, communication signals were scrambled, civilian access was terminated under Bundeswehr Containment Directive 47B. By the third day, all public records of the project had been erased from municipal databases. Inside, forensic engineers catalogued the first chamber, 6 meters wide, 4 meters tall, lined with lead sheeting and a secondary concrete skin. The walls were stamped with serial numbers, KR340, KR341, KR342, indicating prefabricated military segments designed for nuclear blast resistance. Yet the bunker's construction dated to 1944, predating known German atomic infrastructure. The first artifact recovered was a film canister labeled Projekt Morgenrot for Suchreihe 9B. When the footage was digitized, investigators saw grainy images of human silhouettes in pressurized suits standing before a rotating turbine. Each frame was annotated with handwritten codes referencing altitude, heat resistance, and oxygen deprivation thresholds. None of the men in the footage wore identifiable insignia. Some appeared barely conscious, held upright by harnesses. The final seconds of the reel showed a white flash and the sudden collapse of the camera lens. Dr. Anna Weber, the Bundesarchiv historian assigned to the case, traced the Morgenrot name to an unverified wartime directive issued by the SS Wissenschaftsabteilung in early 1945. Here, preliminary report, Phil Ref, BA W204-27, suggested Morgenrot had been a high-altitude propulsion experiment intended for the A-10 missile platform, the theoretical forerunner to the V-2's long-range successor. But her findings stopped short when she noticed inconsistencies in the recovered materials, particularly the presence of post-war alloys in several metallic fragments. Laboratory analysis from the Fraunhofer Institute confirmed it. The polymer traces dated from the late 1950s, a decade after the site was supposedly abandoned. Someone had returned. The deeper the teams went, the more the vault resembled a sealed archive than an active laboratory. Stacked against one wall were 37 crates, each marked with identical stenciling. US Zone Property, Restricted, Allied Command. The crate lids were nailed shut with post-war hardware, and inside, the contents were even stranger. Medical vials, preserved tissues, and notebooks written in alternating German and English. The cover page of one journal bore the initials JRM and a title, Psychophysiologische Grenzversuche, Phase 4. Cross-referencing those initials revealed a name, Dr. James R. McClellan, a US Army physiologist seconded to Operation Paperclip in 1946. McClellan had vanished from official records in 1952. By the time the story reached the press, it was already too late. The government's statement, brief and unemotional, described the discovery of an unregistered wartime storage facility of limited historical significance. No mention of the Allied stencils, no mention of the vials, no mention of the film, Weber, under Non-Disclosure Order 14C79, was reassigned. Her notes, however, survived, copies forwarded anonymously to a small investigative collective known as Archive X. Their analysis of the leaked documents revealed chilling parallels between Morgenroth's notes and a 1958 US Air Force project labeled Thermal Boundary Adaptation. Research, Phase 3. The connection implied continuity, not coincidence. If Morgenroth's science had survived, it had done so under new masters. A month later, Weber received an unmarked envelope at her apartment in Kassel. Inside were 2 black and white photographs. The first showed the same vault entrance, undisturbed, dated 1957. The second was stamped Allied Engineering Corps, site closure confirmed, scribbled on the back. In pencil was a phrase in English. Authorized under Directive 66 read, "Burn all internal logs." The handwriting, later matched by forensic comparison, belonged to Colonel Albert Hanley, formerly of the US Army's Counterintelligence Corps. The deeper investigators probed, the more they unearthed a timeline that didn't add up. Testimonies from local farmers described Allied convoys arriving at the Harz foothills months after Germany's surrender. American engineers, assisted by German prisoners, were seen unloading machinery into the mountain at night. When questioned in later years, most dismissed the accounts as misremembered or fabricated. But newly surfaced aerial reconnaissance photos from August 1945, obtained from the US National Archives under FOIA request 22-7194, showed fresh excavation trenches near Nordhausen, long after the area was supposedly cleared of weapons facilities. The images confirmed it. The vault was post-war. One theory began to emerge among analysts inside Archive X, that Project Morgenroth had been quietly absorbed into a transnational scientific operation involving both German and American personnel, using the chaos of post-war reconstruction as cover. If true, the Nordhausen vault was not a remnant of Nazi research, but the birthplace of a new one, buried and forgotten beneath layers of geopolitical secrecy. The 1957 resealing date, long after the site's operational timeline, aligned with the period of intense Cold War experimentation in aerospace physiology, when both NATO and the Warsaw Pact pursued human endurance data for near-space conditions. The last reel recovered from the site, digitally stabilized and enhanced by Bundesarchiv technicians, contained audio previously dismissed as damaged, but frequency isolation revealed faint dialogue in English. A male voice, calm, methodical, said, "Phase 4 complete. Subject maintained stability for 120 seconds. Proceeding to high-temperature test." Then, silence, followed by the faint hiss of pressurized gas and the unmistakable crackle of flame. The reel ended abruptly. No record exists of who the subjects were or what they were testing for. What remains certain is that the vault beneath Nordhausen was no isolated wartime bunker. It was a sealed experiment, one carried into the Cold War, erased from both sides of history, and rediscovered only when the mountain itself gave up its secret. Chapter 2. Operation Silver Dagger. Unsealed. It began, like so many rediscoveries, with an error in digitization. In 2019, a Czech archivist named Pavel Novotny was tasked with transferring a newly declassified set of 1960s-era Státní bezpečnost (STB) files into the National Digital Repository. Among the reels was a mislabeled envelope marked Diplomatic Correspondence, Vienna 1961. Inside, however, was a faded carbon copy bearing the header Operace Stříbrný Dýka, Operation Silver Dagger. The file, reference code STB INF War Team 4861, contained 15 pages of fragmented communications between Soviet advisors and a rogue Czech intelligence unit. The language was cryptic, referring to a containment incident and loss of package integrity, but the dates coincided with a known nuclear test moratorium period. At first, it seemed like another failed Soviet espionage operation, but a single annexed photograph stamped Mine Site 17B, Jiar Basin, changed everything. The image showed men in radiation suits entering a decommissioned mining shaft, carrying lead-lined cylinders labeled with the international symbol for radioactivity. The caption read only, "Post-test retrieval, Unit ZB42. When Novotny attempted to locate records of the mine, he found it was missing from official geological surveys. 2 weeks later, the image vanished from the online archive. Within days, Novotny's government credentials were suspended pending administrative review. Unofficially, it was clear that someone higher up wanted the file buried again. By early 2020, fragments of the Silver Dagger documents surfaced anonymously across historian forums frequented by Cold War researchers. Among them was Dr. Ingrid Hoffman, an expert in East Bloc atomic diplomacy. Hoffman identified one of the file's signatures as belonging to Colonel Sergei Antonovich Reznikov, a Soviet nuclear safety officer attached to the Semipalatinsk test site until 1959. Reznikov's personnel records show a sudden reassignment to Czechoslovakia in February 1961 under technical liaison mandate 32 Delta. 3 months later, his name disappears entirely from all Soviet registries. The last mention of Reznikov comes from a handwritten memo found in the Silver Dagger Annex, dated June 13, 1961. Containment unstable. Radiation field spreading. Protocol 6 enacted. Seal site immediately. Cross-border. Intelligence cables obtained through the Czech Ministry of Defense archives confirmed that NATO forces had also registered unusual radiological readings along the Slovak border that same week. One declassified US Air Force memo, EUCOM SITREP 61163, mentions an unverified Soviet detonation or spill event detected by atmospheric samplers near Vienna. Officially, both sides denied any incident had occurred. But when Hoffman and her team from the University of Vienna analyzed soil samples from the alleged mine coordinates, they detected trace isotopes of plutonium-240 and americium-241 in ratios inconsistent with Soviet warhead production. The composition matched instead a prototype isotope generator used in early US radiothermal projects. The implication was staggering. An American device had been recovered, all replicated by Soviet proxies deep in Eastern Europe, right at the height of the Cold War. When Hoffman went public with her findings in a 2021 academic paper, Transnational Containment Anomalies, the Silver Dagger Hypothesis, the backlash was immediate. Government agencies issued rebuttals, claiming her isotope data was environmentally cross-contaminated. Yet off-record interviews with retired Czech engineers told a different story. One, identified only as Milan K, described being part of a cleanup unit in 1962, ordered to seal an underground cavity filled with crushed metallic debris and melted concrete. He recalled being issued Soviet rations and uniforms, though his orders came in Czech. They said it was a radiation leak from a foreign device, Milan recounted in a recorded interview before his death in 2022. They told us not to ask where it came from, just to bury it. Deeper research uncovered another layer of deception. NATO's Defense Intelligence Agency archives held a 1962 report labeled Project Trinity Echo, Incident Assessment, Central Europe. The report mentioned an unauthorized cross-factional exchange between mid-level Warsaw Pact and NATO scientists attempting to share nuclear test data to prevent treaty violations. Codenamed Silver Dagger, the operation was supposedly designed to verify the partial test ban treaty, but internal sabotage led to a catastrophic radiation incident. The official conclusion described it as a technical malfunction, but redacted appendices referenced structural collapse due to destabilized isotopic field. A classified annex, later reconstructed from foyer fragments, made a more disturbing claim that the containment package recovered from the Slovak mine was not Soviet, not American, but a joint research prototype constructed in secrecy by both sides under deniable funding streams. Neither superpower could afford for the truth to emerge. Hoffman's investigation reached a breaking point when she obtained a decrypted STB microfilm roll designated INFA 3219. The film showed a convoy of trucks crossing the Austrian border at night, escorted by unmarked vehicles bearing temporary diplomatic plates. The footage ended with the convoy entering a tunnel complex beneath the Low Tatras, coordinates later matching the declassified Mine 17B. Satellite imaging in 2021 confirmed the site's entrance had collapsed decades ago, but georadar scans detected an anomalous void beneath, roughly the size of a football field, containing metallic signatures consistent with reactor shielding. The Czech government promptly revoked the research team's excavation license, citing environmental hazards. Within a week, the mine's coordinates were reclassified under Ministry of Defense control. The remaining Silver Dagger files surfaced briefly on a dark web archive called Echo Grid, operated by anonymous whistleblowers. Among the materials was an English-language memorandum titled Interim Containment Report, dated July 1961, bearing both Soviet and NATO approval stamps. The text described a temporary neutralization agreement following a radiation release during Field Verification Test 9. The parties involved the US Atomic Energy Commission, the Soviet Committee for State Security, and an unspecified Third Technical Council. The document concluded with the phrase, "Subject secured. All personnel terminated per protocol. Today, only fragments of that story survive." The Slovak authorities deny any knowledge of a radiological site near Žia Basin. The US and Russia maintain no record of Operation Silver Dagger. Yet environmental sensors in the region still detect background radiation spikes after heavy rainfall, too localized, too consistent to be natural. Independent researchers using drone-mounted spectrometers have mapped faint heat emissions emanating from beneath the forested hills, as if something still burns deep underground. Whether it is the decaying residue of a long-buried device or an ongoing reaction remains unknown. What is certain is that the events of 1961 were not an accident, but an operation gone catastrophically wrong, buried under treaties, lies, and 50 years of silence. And like the vault at Nordhausen, the mine at Žia stands as another relic of a war that was never declared, fought in shadows, and sealed beneath the earth to protect truths too dangerous for the world to remember. Chapter 3. The Black Archive of Gdynia. On April 3, 2020, sonar scans from a maritime survey vessel, the Baltica 4, detected an unusual mass on the seabed, 15 kilometers off the coast of Gdynia, Poland. At first, it appeared to be another wartime wreck, one of hundreds that littered the Baltic's cold floor. But divers soon realized the ship was not listed in any wartime registry. Its hull bore faint traces of a Kriegsmarine Eagle, stripped of identification numbers. The vessel, roughly 68 meters in length, had been scuttled deliberately, its cargo hold sealed with lead. When the first crate was hoisted to the surface, the Polish Maritime Authority immediately halted civilian operations and imposed a restricted zone. The discovery triggered a classified response from Warsaw's Ministry of Culture, and unexpectedly from NATO's Historical Analysis Division. They called it the Gdynia event. What the divers had recovered was not a shipwreck. It was an archive, one that should not have existed. The first recovered container was stamped Reichsministerium für wissenschaftliche Forschung, Kalt, 1945. Inside were reels of microfilm wrapped in oilcloth, each marked with the letter K, followed by sequential numbers. Initial analysis by maritime conservators at the National Museum in Gdansk revealed text references to Kultlinie, a codename never before seen in Nazi-era research records. The reels contained fragmentary documentation of atmospheric and electromagnetic experiments, referencing controlled interference layers and signal deflection via particulate diffusion. One particular page, preserved almost perfectly, read, Experimental outcome 7B, localized disturbance of radar transmission through stratified vapor release successful. Further trials pending field relocation. The discovery baffled both historians and physicists. The document appeared to describe an early attempt at weather modification or radar interference, an idea decades ahead of its time. What puzzled investigators most was the ship's manifest. Written in a mix of German and English, it listed items loaded at Stettin Harbour in April 1945. Laboratory materials, atmospheric sensors, chemical dispersal apparatus, optical recording units. Each line bore a set of initials. HK, later identified as belonging to Dr. Heinrich Krüger, a meteorological engineer with known ties to Luftwaffe communications research. Krüger disappeared after the war, presumed dead. Yet new evidence suggests he may have defected to the Soviet Union under an alias, working at an atmospheric research station near Murmansk. A 1952 KGB memo recovered from the Lubyanka archives, labeled Project Nordfeld, references Western-acquired expertise on atmospheric signal masking. The connection was undeniable. The cargo from the Gdynia wreck may have been delivered, or copied, into Soviet hands. The story deepened when Polish archivists began cataloguing the microfilm. Out of 412 reels, 87 were sealed in protective glass cylinders, an unusual preservation method for wartime materials. Each reel contained thousands of meticulously typed data entries, measuring temperature, air pressure, and electromagnetic field fluctuations at various altitudes. The metadata pointed to test flights conducted between 1943 and 1945 over the Baltic and North Sea. But one flight record, dated March 1945, listed coordinates that no known Luftwaffe mission had ever reached. 61 degrees, 21 degrees, over the Gulf of Bothnia, deep in Allied intercepted airspace. That same night, British radar stations reported massive false echoes along the Scandinavian corridor, later attributed to solar interference. The logs from Kaltlinie suggested otherwise. In the following months, historians at Warsaw University uncovered a reference in post-war Soviet documentation to an anomalous polar disturbance event, April 1945, which coincided precisely with Kaltlinie's final experiment. According to those records, Soviet monitoring stations in Karelia had registered sudden fluctuations in magnetic resonance lasting 12 minutes, too localized to be natural. Declassified OSS cables from May 1945 hinted that Allied forces had also intercepted unexplained atmospheric disturbances near Lübeck, just days before the German surrender. Both sides recorded it. Neither side understood it. Forensic examination of the microfilm reels by the Bundesarchiv's Restoration Lab revealed further irregularities. Several films used Kodak acetate stock produced in the United States between 1951 and 1953, years after the war's end. Experts concluded that someone had duplicated or continued the Kaltlinie records post-war, using contemporary materials. But why would someone go to such lengths to preserve an obsolete Nazi project? A redacted memo in the same archive provided a clue. Dated 1954 and written in Russian, it referred to a joint East German-Soviet meteorological monitoring operation codenamed Oberfläche 3. The memo noted that Project Kaltlinie data successfully integrated into experimental weather diffusion trials under Murmansk. Directive, the science that began in wartime, Germany had survived and evolved. Under Soviet custody, by mid-2021, portions of the Dinia archive were quietly transferred to a NATO intelligence unit based in Brussels for forensic analysis. Investigators soon found parallels between Kaltlinie and a later Western program, the US Air Force's Project Cirrus, 1947-1952, an early weather modification initiative involving hurricane seeding. The similarities in terminology and data structure were too precise to ignore. Some files even used identical measurement coding systems. A classified NATO assessment concluded that both East and West had, unknowingly or not, built upon the same wartime foundation. Kaltlinie's atmospheric interference research appeared to have been shared, or stolen, across the emerging Iron Curtain. A deeper mystery emerged in 2022 when divers returned to the wreck to map its lower compartments. Beneath the archive's storage bay, they discovered a small observation chamber fitted with thick glass ports facing the ocean. The interior walls were lined with copper wiring and two large cylindrical tanks still connected to corroded valves. Radiation readings spiked slightly higher than expected background levels, but no known fissile materials were detected. On one wall, divers found a partially preserved sign painted in red. Versuchsraum 3. Beobachtung nur mit Freigabe. Test Chamber 3. Observation only with clearance. The implication was chilling. The ship had been more than a cargo vessel. It was a mobile laboratory. Among the final recovered items was a sealed metal tube containing a 12-page report titled Abschlussbericht Kaltlinie, März 1945. The closing paragraph, written in precise German script, read, "Atmospheric dispersal successful within controlled field radius. Radar interference achieved. Awaiting final authorization for deployment in Western Corridor. Evacuation recommended upon Allied advance." The date, April 23, 1945, placed the report within days of Germany's surrender. The evacuation order was signed by Dr. Heinrich Krüger himself. The report's final line, added in a different hand, simply read, "All units to be relocated via Baltic transport under full concealment." To this day, the Polish government refuses to disclose the total number of crates recovered from the wreck, citing national security in cooperation with Allied research partners. Unofficially, however, leaked correspondence from NATO's technical assessment. Office in Brussels refers to the Gdynia find as one of the most significant scientific recoveries since the fall of the Berlin Wall. Whatever remains of Kaltlinie now resides in sealed climate-controlled vaults across Europe. Independent investigators who attempted to trace Krüger's movements after 1945 uncovered a single Soviet census record from 1956 listing a Heinrich Krugor living near Kandalaksha. Employed as a meteorologist, 2 years later, his name disappeared again. Today, the Baltic wreck lies silent beneath 110 meters of water. Divers who have visited the site describe an oppressive stillness, a sensation of static in the water, as if something unseen still hums beneath the metal decks. The sea has preserved the ship, but not the truth it carried. The Black Archive of Gdynia remains an unanswered question. Proof that the scientific ambitions of the Third Reich did not die with its fall, but were quietly absorbed into the global machinery of the Cold War. In the end, it was not ideology that united East and West beneath the waves, but science, ambitious, immoral, and sealed in steel, waiting to be found again. Chapter 4, The Siberian Listening Station. In August 2021, satellite reconnaissance from the European Space Agency's Cryosat-2 mission detected a geometric anomaly emerging from retreating permafrost north of Norilsk. The coordinates 69 degree 2842 N, 88 degree 11 ZO3E corresponded to a barren sector long marked as restricted on Soviet-era maps. Analysts initially dismissed it as a geological formation, until further imagery revealed hexagonal contours, unnaturally symmetrical, 30 meters across. Within weeks, Russian geologists dispatched under Rosgeologia authorization discovered the entrance to a vast subterranean structure sealed beneath a layer of glacial sediment. Inside, buried under decades of ice, they found reinforced corridors, data reels, and mechanical consoles, all labeled in Cyrillic and dated between 1962 and 1968. The walls bore the faded insignia of the GRU's 4th Directorate. The site's operational code name, etched into a corroded sign, read simply, ZOV, ZOV. The first exploration team documented 3 primary chambers, each resembling a radio operations room. Racks of analog equipment lined the walls, and an array of antenna couplers still protruded from the ceiling, like ribs of a machine frozen in time. The reels, when thawed and transported to the Siberian Federal Archives, contained recorded transmissions labeled RLS Delta, 1963. Audio restoration experts were stunned. The tapes held intercepted American missile telemetry from early Cold War test ranges in the Pacific, recorded with remarkable clarity. But what made them extraordinary were additional sequences, voice transmissions in English and Russian that did not correspond to any known broadcast. The content was simple, repeated phrases, fragments of commands, numerical codes. A voice, American, saying, "Negative response, frequency shift detected," followed by a Russian reply, "Signal, not ours. Maintain silence." It was as if both sides had been listening to something that neither had sent declassified. CIA reconnaissance imagery from 1978 had briefly mentioned Site 342R, suspected to be a Soviet deep listening array constructed to intercept NATO satellite relays. That entry vanished from agency indexes by 1981. With the rediscovery of ZOV, analysts began piecing together the missing records. A formally redacted document in the National Security Archive, titled Project Nightholo, Soviet EM Spectrum. Analysis capabilities described unconfirmed evidence of long-range suboral capture technologies, capable of intercepting communication frequencies through atmospheric resonance, rather than direct radio signals. The concept was theoretical, bordering on science fiction, but the equipment at ZOV suggested someone had tried to make it real. Dr. Yelena Trofimova, a Russian communications historian, granted limited access to the recovered materials, uncovered correspondence between ZOV's chief engineer, Major Viktor Dorofeyev, and Moscow's Technical Bureau 22. The letters, preserved in carbon copies, referenced signal bleed from orbital, platforms, and unauthorized modulation at channel R4. Dorofeyev warned that transmissions were being received before satellite deployment schedules officially began. "Either the Americans have achieved early orbital communication," he wrote in a 1963 memo, "or we are intercepting echoes of systems not yet operational." That sentence, buried in a classified folder for nearly 60 years, raised questions that would define the investigation. In December 2021, following international diplomatic tensions, independent analysts obtained a partial set of declassified US Air Force documents under FOIA case HAV 24-3E87. Among them was a report dated July 1963, NORAD interference event. Source: undetermined. The report detailed unexplained distortions across multiple radar bands coinciding with solar activity, but inconsistent with known atmospheric interference. The event lasted 12 minutes, the same duration as anomalies logged in ZOV's recovered records. Both systems, separated by thousands of kilometers, had recorded identical disturbances at precisely 03:22 GMT. A secret memorandum from General Curtis LeMay to the National Reconnaissance Office followed weeks later, reading, "Recommend total silence regarding Siberian anomalies. Soviet listening activity may be experimental. Do not acknowledge intercept data." By early 2022, the Russian government quietly reclassified the ZOV site under Federal Defense Property Code 9-113R, restricting access and halting all excavation. But leaked drone footage, captured before the lockdown, showed rows of cylindrical containers stacked against the far wall of the third chamber, each marked with radiation hazard symbols. Analysts speculated they housed the power cores for the array's frequency amplifiers. A later assessment by the University of Bergen suggested that ZOV's power systems were based on thermoelectric converters, devices similar to those used in early space probes. If true, the Soviet Union had been running a nuclear-powered listening station in the Arctic wilderness throughout the 1960s, tuned not just to Western communications, but to the Earth's electromagnetic envelope itself. A set of 6 restored tapes, now designated the ZOV sequence, revealed a more human dimension. One recording captured a technician's voice during a night shift, dated October 11, 1965. Through static, he muttered, "Channel B12 active again. Repeat pattern detected. Same code, same frequency." His supervisor responded, "Ignore external anomalies. Maintain primary feed." 30 seconds later, a faint whisper in English intruded, "End transmission. No contact permitted." The technicians remained silent for nearly a minute before the recorder clicked off. The logs show that the event was classified as Phenomenon 8, and the shift personnel were reassigned the following day. No further recordings of that frequency were ever logged. Documents recovered from Dorofeyev's office revealed his growing paranoia. In one handwritten note dated February 1966, he wrote, "Our receivers are hearing not just them, but something else, an echo across time." Later analysis confirmed the phrase "across time" was a mistranslation. The original Russian likely meant "across the line," referring to the signal barrier separating NATO and Soviet frequencies. Still, conspiracy theorists seized upon it, claiming ZOV had intercepted communications from the future. Serious researchers ignored such notions, but the technical mystery remained. How had a 1960s-era Soviet station captured data frequencies matching early American satellite telemetry, years before those satellites were operational? In 2023, joint researchers from the European Space Research Institute and Russian technical universities conducted a controlled excavation of the ZOV site's subterranean chamber. They discovered a central control unit beneath a layer of compacted soil. It bore the serial number M124R and a manufacturer's plate reading Design Bureau Chelomy, 1962. Chelomy was known for missile and satellite systems, not radio equipment. The hardware's purpose remains debated. Some suggest it was a prototype for low-frequency data collection from missile tests. Others believe it was an early attempt at geophysical surveillance, an effort to detect underground nuclear tests through resonance mapping. Whatever its intended function, ZOV's real achievement was scale, a system that stretched across thousands of kilometers, listening to the planet itself. Today, most of the recovered reels sit in a climate-controlled vault in Krasnoyarsk, under the joint custody of the Russian Ministry of Defense and the Academy of Sciences. Requests for access are routinely denied. Trofimova's final paper, Silent Frequencies, The Legacy of ZOV, concluded that the array's design implied cooperation between rival research entities that officially never existed. Her closing line, printed quietly before the paper's withdrawal in 2024, read, "ZOV was not a listening post. It was a mirror. One side spoke, the other reflected. And somewhere between, the echo became indistinguishable from the signal. Whether the echo was natural, accidental, or something humanity itself had created in the fervor of Cold War paranoia, no one can say. What is certain is that deep beneath the Siberian ice, a listening station still sleeps, its circuits corroded but intact, waiting for the world to thaw enough to hear again. Chapter 5. The Geneva Sub-Level Experiments. When the renovation crews broke through the marble flooring of the old League of Nations headquarters in 2024, they expected only dormant electrical lines and asbestos piping. Instead, they uncovered a sealed iron door embedded in concrete, marked with the fading stencil, UN Technical Storage, access denied since 1959. The door was welded shut from the inside. The Swiss Federal Police arrived within hours, and by dawn, the United Nations office at Geneva had assumed control. The site, an unregistered sub-level 20 meters below ground, was quietly designated as Zone 17B. The first inspection team, led by civil engineer Marc Dufour, described the air as impossibly dry, metallic and unaged. Inside the corridor, light reflected from cracked lead tiles and glass fixtures. At the end of the hall stood another sealed chamber, its brass plaque green with corrosion. Projet Mercure, 1947. Initial assessments concluded that the substructure had been built shortly after the war, coinciding with the early formation of the United Nations Atomic Energy Commission. No blueprints for Zone 17B existed in Geneva's architectural archives. The chamber's walls were coated with layers of lead-based shielding, and scattered across the floor were charred notebooks, shattered glass tubing, and an overturned observation window facing a room-sized containment tank. Radiation sensors indicated residual contamination consistent with uranium decay, yet the readings fluctuated irregularly, as if an intermittent source remained active. Among the debris, investigators recovered a half-melted metal plate bearing the engraved names of 3 institutions: Commissariat à l'Énergie Atomique, CEA, US Atomic Energy Commission, AEC, and CNRS Geneva Liaison. The implication was extraordinary. French, American, and Swiss scientists had conducted unregistered atomic research under diplomatic cover, mere meters beneath the birthplace of international neutrality. Forensic restoration of the burned documents revealed references to quantum field stabilization and magnetogravitic containment trials, language far beyond the standard atomic lexicon of the 1940s. A single surviving report, labeled Mercure Technical Log, Phase 2, May 1947, detailed an experiment involving particle cohesion under artificial resonance. The entries recorded a series of escalating tests, culminating in one labeled Run 9C. The final note read, Containment unstable, frequencies exceeding 5.2 MeV differential, field collapse probable. The handwriting abruptly stopped mid-line. Investigators found a scorched section of the chamber wall where metal had fused like molten glass, evidence of an intense but localized release of energy. A subsequent chemical analysis of nearby residue revealed traces of thorium fluoride and mercury vapor, materials used in early nuclear plasma research. The name Projet Mercure suddenly made sense. The Swiss Federal Archive soon received a formal request from the International Atomic Energy Agency to take custody of all recovered materials. Yet a leak from within the investigation, later traced to an archivist, surfaced photographs of a different nature. Among the scorched remains were 2 small American notebooks with government-issue covers stamped "Confidential, property of US Army Signal Corps." Inside were notes dated 1948 and signed with initials HM. The handwriting matched that of Dr. Harold M. Lanning, an American physicist previously attached to Operation Paperclip. Lanning's post-war research involved advanced magnetron design for radar systems, yet by 1947 he had vanished from US records. If Lanning had indeed worked beneath Geneva, it implied that former Axis and Allied scientists were conducting joint experiments under UN diplomatic protection, untraceable to any single government. By early 2025, the UN authorized a limited disclosure acknowledging the existence of historical research facilities beneath its Geneva complex, but denied any nuclear involvement. However, leaked correspondence between the Swiss Department of Energy and NATO's Strategic Science Directorate, SSD, told another story. In one letter, dated February 2024, SSD operative Colonel Michael Baines wrote, "Recovered reactor fragments suggest pre-critical containment, design inconsistent with Manhattan-era architecture, strong parallels to early NATO Project Argus simulations. Project Argus, a classified 1958 US operation involving high-altitude nuclear detonations for radar experimentation, was never officially connected to European facilities. Yet the implication was that its theoretical roots may have originated years earlier under Geneva's diplomatic foundations. A second exploration team, accompanied by radiation specialists, re-entered Zone 17B in July 2024 after the initial cleanup. In the western wing, they discovered a smaller chamber walled off with heavy bolts and an improvised cement barrier. Inside was a desk, several sealed file boxes, and a corroded typewriter. The top file bore the heading Mercure Oversight Committee, Internal Summary, December 1947. The document, partially legible, included a chilling paragraph. Project Mercure will be absorbed into North Atlantic Experimental Protocols under Section 509B, remaining personnel to be reassigned under NATO Research Command. The sublevel is to remain sealed indefinitely per UN Directive 9-12C. It was signed by 3 individuals: Jean-Paul Sorel, France, Lieutenant Robert McIntyre, US, and an unidentified Dr. WWII, presumed to be a pseudonym. The language indicated that Mercure's assets were transferred directly into a post-war alliance framework years before, NATO's formal establishment in 1949. The recovered logs also mentioned periodic energy spikes detected in the chamber well after operations ceased. To verify this, modern survey teams installed continuous monitoring sensors in late 2024. Within 3 weeks, instruments recorded microbursts of electromagnetic activity occurring precisely every 9 hours and 14 minutes, consistent, patterned, and unexplained. The pulses were too weak to be external interference, but matched the frequency of an experimental resonance coil described in Mercure's technical papers. Somehow, the system buried under Geneva's soil still emitted trace signals nearly 80 years after its abandonment. An internal Swiss memo, later obtained by investigative journalist Anneliese Brunner, described frantic diplomatic exchanges between the UN and NATO following the discovery. One line read simply, "Ensure complete suppression of the Mercure narrative. Any confirmation of post-war UN atomic trials would undermine Article 1 neutrality claims." Brunner's exposé, published briefly online before removal, referenced a sealed crate marked Hydria 9 Do Not Activate. She claimed the crate contained the core of Mercure's containment device, a hybrid magnetic reactor unlike anything from that era. Within days, Brunner's article vanished, and her press credentials were revoked under Swiss Federal Order 298/23. The UN declined to comment. In January 2025, independent physicist Dr. Thomas Keller obtained leaked spectrograph data from the Zone 17B sensors. His analysis suggested that the periodic emissions corresponded to an internal oscillation rather than radioactive decay. Whatever Mercure was, Keller said in a private interview, it wasn't a simple nuclear reactor. It was a field generator, a primitive test for space-time field stabilization, decades before such theories even had vocabulary. His findings were dismissed as speculative, but the Swiss government quietly increased security around the site. Satellite imagery now shows newly reinforced ventilation shafts and continuous thermal activity in the area, despite official claims that Zone 17B remains sealed. The final revelation came from a retired NATO technician, codenamed Subject Cobalt, who contacted the European Archives Commission in late 2025. He claimed that, during the early 1980s, he had worked on a project named Hydria, described as Energy Field Containment Research for Secure Communications. When shown the leaked Mercure documents, Cobalt identified the logo stamped on the Geneva crates, the same sigil used by the Hydria Directorate in Brussels decades later. His testimony concluded with a single sentence transcribed in the EAC record: Geneva wasn't the beginning, it was the handover. To this day, the United Nations refuses to acknowledge any historical connection between Project Mercure and subsequent NATO scientific programs. Zone 17B remains under sealed diplomatic custody, inaccessible to both researchers and journalists. At night, construction workers at the Palais des Nations claim to hear low mechanical hums from beneath the marble floors, consistent with magnetic oscillations, though officials attribute it to ventilation machinery. But those who have seen the data believe differently. The Geneva sub-level experiments stand as a reminder that, beneath the rhetoric of peace, the foundations of diplomacy may have hidden the earliest threads of a technology too advanced and too dangerous for the world to see. And whatever lies beneath those foundations still stirs, pulsing faintly, like a remnant heartbeat under the heart of global neutrality itself.